All right. Thank you all for joining me tonight on Thursday, July 24th, for the All About Camellias presentation. Some of you may have been at the advanced training that I had yesterday. Uh, in retrospect, it's a little crazy. I had to really work on this one. After I had just gotten done with that. So I'm a little tired, and hopefully this one will measure up. But today, in this particular presentation, we're going to talk about anything and everything camellia. So we'll learn about the different types. We'll learn about what they need, how tall they grow, growth habits in general, hardiness, diseases, all of that good stuff. So we will learn about all of that. And if you have questions, as always, you can drop those in the chat box, and I am happy to answer those at the end. You've all been muted, and I think I have it set so that you cannot unmute yourself unless I request it to. This will last about an hour. And if you have an interest in the slide deck, you are welcome to reach out to me via my email that you'll see on the last slide of the presentation, and I will be happy to share that with you. I'll probably also put my email address in the chat box at the end of the presentation. And if you are watching this recorded, I do obviously record them. They end up on our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, where all of my presentations that I record are archived. These all qualify for Master Gardener continuing education credits. So this one will qualify for 1 hour's worth of continuing education in the state of Georgia. And let's go ahead and get started. So let's learn about a little bit about the history of camellias. So I didn't know a ton about them before I started to research this to kind of pull this together. I have several in my yard. They're very pretty. They're evergreens. They make great hedges. They have beautiful flowers in late fall and winter. And honestly, other than that, and just kind of peripheral knowledge, because I've had some issues like the the galls, and you'll learn about that. I'll tell you about that. I really didn't think much about them, but they really do have a fascinating history. So camellias, as a native, are native to East Asia, usually mostly in China. You can see the map down below. That's the natives. Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. That's where they kind of started out. Obviously, we have a lot more now, and they do really well here in the Southeast. So now you can see we've added some countries in Africa. We have the US and up into Alaska, even down into Australia, New Zealand, all the way up, even further north than China, and in parts of the EU, Spain, France, the UK, that kind of thing. So they've really kind of gone globally, if you want to think about it that way. So there's over 250 recognized species in the genus Camellia. Although some taxonomic sources, it could be anywhere from like 80 to 280 species. But because they are really popular in the nursery industry, you know that they are constantly working on new and different cultivars that they can release to the general public and make lots of money off of. So they were first cultivated in China about 5,000 years ago, mostly for tea. So some people, like me, I guess I just never really thought about it. I'm not a tea drinker either, not really, but that is what makes tea. So the leaves, the tea leaves that you use in your sweet tea or your hot tea, that is Camellia sinensis. And then if you have the oil, that's Camellia oleifera. So maybe you didn't know that. Now you know. The more you know, right? But in Japan, Camellia japonica, I am not going to try to say that. I don't speak Japanese, I'm sorry. And Camellia sasanqua, also known as sazanka, those are held in very spiritual significance, and they are planted in temple gardens. So if you've done any traveling over to Japan, you probably have seen some there. Um, with all that breeding and that history, because it goes back so far, there are now about 3,000 plus or minus named hybrids. That's a lot. Not the most, but that's a lot. And just as an aside for tea, if you're a tea lover, it became popular back in China around 1700 BC. And the interesting part, of course, I did a recent road trip up along the East Coast, and that included going through Boston. So, introduced to Europe via the East India Company in the 17th century, and that led to the Boston Tea Party. So that's how camellias are kind of linked to the American Revolution. So kind of cool, huh? And there's your tea. Just a little pictorial. I just kind of wanted to play around with AI a little bit. So this is actually an AI generated infographic. I thought it was kind of cool, and it put together all of the history of it and just kind of a nice little condensed document. Okay, so let's dive into the specifics. We're going to talk about all sorts of goodies. So flowers, colors, bloom time, growth habits, and cold hardiness. There are these are the main types. We'll talk mostly about Camellia japonica, Camellia sasanqua. We'll talk a little bit about Reticulata and sinensis, but those are your tea camellias and chrysanthemum. That's a yellow one. So some of you may be lucky and you have some of those, but they are tropical, so you probably have in a pot, if I'm guessing, right? We're a little too far north, but we'll talk about hardiness. So let's kind of dive into the different flower shapes. So we have single flowers, and you can see there that it just has the singular petal structure. Semi-doubles, which look like a single smushed together, the anemone, which to me looks a little bit like a peony flower, but that's the anemone structure. The rose, which is very beautiful, very gorgeous and very formal looking. The peony, which does look like a peony, and the formal double. So very beautiful flowers. It's come a long way from where it was. Obviously, the native varieties look pretty much just like that single flower there. Not many colors to speak of, but still very pretty, very pretty. So the flower colors of camellias. So natives are going to be white, pink, and these are all natives here so that you can see, and then red. You can get, and that those are the colors that we'll mostly see here, but you can also get the Camellia chrysantha, which is down below. That also is yellow and it is a native, but it's a tropical, so you're not going to see it here unless it is a hybrid of one of these others. So cultivars, those are going to be blush, so the white with pink tinges to them. Sometimes you might see yellow tinges. There's all sorts of different kind of combinations for that. Very pretty. You get bicolors, where you have big blotchy colors of pinks and reds with a white background, or pink with darker pink. Then you have the yellow. This is pretty rare. You're not going to see this again. It's a tropical. And then you have your variegated, which is what you see there. Generally reds and maybe not light, but usually a darker pink with the white mixed in. And then the blend, which almost looks like it's been touched with a watercolor brush or something like that. Very pretty. What you won't see, let's look at some of the colors you will not see. So you will not see a rainbow camellia. So what you see there in the middle, that beautiful, no, that does not exist. And you can see why it's not currently available, because that seller probably got kicked off for bad reviews, because rainbow camellias do not exist. Purple camellias do not exist in nature and in the cultivars that you can purchase. That is an AI generated or a photoshopped color. So if you see these and I just plucked them off Amazon, or if you see them on Etsy, they do not exist. Nope. Or blue. Mm-mm. No blue flowers. Okay. So if you see this, you know why they do that. Because you see their seeds. Camellias are not fast growing. So to plant a seed and get the plant to come up and then possibly somewhere down the line get it to bloom, you're talking many, many, many years. And that seller is going to be long gone. But in the meantime, they've collected your money. So just know that these colors, no, they don't exist in nature. They're just not out there. So bloom time for camellias. Um, I always learned the rhyme Camellia sasanqua September. So usually they're going to be late fall, early winter. And then obviously the other very popular kind are the japonicas. And those technically are going to be like December, January, February, but as late as April. It kind of depends a little bit on which cultivar native you're talking about. There's so many, but they all kind of have, their little set bloom periods. The reticulata, that's going to be like February to April. That's a late bloomer, a little frost sensitive. So you don't see a ton of those here. Most of what you're going to see here around the Atlanta area are going to be the Sasanquas and the Japonicas. And then you have Camellia Himalis. That's a hybrid group, and they have kind of an extended bloom time. Some of these are fairly new. You don't see them a ton, but they're gaining popularity. And then you have, of course, the Camellia sinensis, which is a tea plant. So those are found more in like zone 9, 10. So that's again your tea plant. And bloom duration, they're a little bit temperature dependent, but most of them are going to last a couple days, each bloom will. And each plant, if it's a larger plant, will last about 6 to 12 weeks. So a fairly long bloom period, which is kind of nice because remember, most of these are blooming in late fall, early winter on through early winter into fairly early spring. So that's a time when we don't have a lot of flowers blooming. And so it's very welcome, especially since it's an evergreen. But then seeing those beautiful blossoms out there, it just kind of makes me smile. This looks like my office here. This is actually not my office. It's not even my nice house, but I actually have a Camellia japonica that's outside my window here. It's a fairly old plant, has nice red blossoms. And I love sitting here and kind of turning around and looking at it every so often in the wintertime. It makes me smile. So factors that can influence your bloom time, of course, climate. So having a mild winter, that's going to encourage earlier and longer blooming. And just the same thing as if you get nipped with an early frost, if you have a really cold period in your winter, that can freeze your flowers. So you have to kind of hope that you're not going to have flowers that have been forced too early because it's been kind of warm. Here we don't typically have too many problems, but you always, hope you can maybe plant them in kind of a semi-protected area. Like in my case, it's right next to my house. They have photoperiod sensitivity, so the shorter days are going to kind of trigger that bud development in fall. That doesn't change a whole lot. I know we've all heard that the day is like we have had our longest day ever because now it is like a tenth of a microsecond shorter. So, but that's not going to affect anything here, so don't worry about that. Soil and care. So we have lots of acidic soil here in Georgia, and they prefer that, which is why they do so well here. So well-drained soil, constant moisture, that's going to promote healthy blooms. So a nice established plant is going to be covered in blooms. And if you ever want to go see a nice collection, Atlanta Botanical Gardens has them in abundance. And if you get there in February, March-ish, even into April, you'll see a very nice collection of really pretty camellias blooming. So how about layering bloom time for camellias? We're all for having as many blooms in our gardens all the time, all year round. I mean, it's a good thing. So yes, you can totally do that with all the different cultivars. So you can combine sasanquas with japonicas. So you have kind of a bloom time for maybe October-ish, depending on which cultivars you choose, all the way through until very early spring. You can have some microclimate management. I did mention that. So things that are cultivars that are a little bit frost sensitive, you can actually put them, if you have a brick house, put them maybe on the sunny southern side where you get the heat of the sun will kind of bake into the brick, and then that can radiate out and provide a little bit of a microclimate. So you might be able to get those reticulatas to bloom. Color coordination. So you can kind of take a choice of all of those different beautiful colors and variegations and bloom sizes and the anemones and the peony looking flowers, and have seasonal shifts. So you could go maybe really dramatic around Christmas time with deep reds, and then go for light pinks and whites earlier and then into spring. And then pollinator value, we're always looking for that. So the single flowered species typically are going to attract bees during the cool months. So here in Georgia, we tend to have 70-degree days that pop up here and there all through the winter. We'll have our real cold periods, usually like late January into February for a couple weeks where we might dip below zero and then we pop back up. But any time is fair game for those 70-degree days. And so the bugs need something, and these flowers can provide a good nectar attractant for them. So you can see here I've got a little bit of a bloom arc where you can see the different types, the popular types that are around here, and how they overlap. And then some of the colors over here in the months that they bloom. So growth habits. The only ones I have here are very upright in growth. They're very old. So these are maybe 20 years old and they're probably 15 feet tall. I just let them do their thing. They're planted in an area where that's okay. And I periodically prune them back a little bit when they get a little unwieldy, but otherwise I just let them do their thing. So again, they do make a pretty good hedge. They're just very slow growing. So if you are lucky enough to live in an older home that's got a hedge of these beautiful trees, which at 15 feet, I'm going to call it a tree, enjoy it because they can be very long lived, and they provide, again, those beautiful flowers in the wintertime. So you're going to have your uprights, and they grow very vertically. They have a nice strong central leader. You can actually kind of prune them a little bit into a small tree, which is kind of interesting. Their growth habit, they're kind of columnar if you just let them do their thing. That's kind of vase shaped, and they can get up to 25 feet. So that's pretty tall. So you don't want to put that right against your house unless you're going to do some major pruning. So you can train these into an espalier, which what that is, if you're not familiar, you're going to have essentially like a trellis system against your house, and then you're going to train them to grow flat along this trellis system. And so you're going to train them along the different parts, branches of your trellis system on your house or your fence or whatever else that you're growing them on. Some good examples are going to be the Nuco's Gem, which you see there. It's the white one. Has nice double white blooms. You've got debutante, that's the pink peony kind of flower. And then you have the Camellia sasanqua Yuletide. And we typically will sell Yuletide at our extension plant sale in the spring. So we have almost sell it, every time it sells out. I mean, it's a pretty popular flower. It's a really pretty red flower. And it's named that way because when does it bloom? December. So you can have some pretty showy red flowers in December. So spreading camellias. So these are going to grow wider than they are tall. They they can still get, somewhat tall, but they're gonna widen out a lot more than the other upright ones. So there are a mixture here, sasanquas and japonicas. So you see below you have Shishigashira. That's another one that we occasionally sell at the Gwinnett Extension Plant Sale. And then you have Pink Perfection. That's a beautiful double bloom, and those look really good if you want to put them in like a white vase with some marbles in the bottom and what very pretty, very classy. And then the Kanjiro, that's another beautiful pink one, kind of a rose pink color. And again, these are not going to get as tall as they are going to get wide. They will widen out really well. Next, we have dwarf camellias. So, if it weren't for the bloom, you might mistake them for gardenias, which are blooming in the summertime. But these are perfect for containers. So, if you don't have a lot of space, maybe you have a little balcony, maybe you have just a stoop in the back because you live in a townhome and you just don't have the space, these are really good for pots. So, they stay fairly compact and they're pretty manageable. You might have to do a little bit of pruning, but again, they're fairly slow growing plants. So a little bit of pruning, but they're just compact anyway. So perfect. So 1 to 3 feet tall and kind of bushy and lots of pretty flowers. I like that baby bear. That's a really soft kind of pink color, very petite looking, beautiful. Little Leanne, you've got the compact white doubles and the snow flurry there that you see in the middle. Okay, weeping camellias. So these are going to be really kind of a cascading or pendulous type of growth. The one that I see that when I was doing all of the research is the far one, right one, the Haikunen Kujara, Kujaku, Hokuan Kujaku. I have not personally seen that one. That is beautiful. So the blossoms truly are pendulous on that one. And to me, if I was walking past it, I really wouldn't think camellia, but it is. It is a camellia. Remember, there's a lot more history here in the Far East than there is in what we have here. So a lot more over there, probably varieties that we just aren't familiar with here. But we do, being a former Zone 7B and now 8A, we are very similar. And we do have a lot of plants from over in that particular part of the world. So knowing that, you probably could, if you are a traveler or can source that, it would probably do okay here. So these are going to be arching or trailing branches, very similar to a Banksian rose, I would think. So very dramatic looking. And some of the cultivars are going to be like Marge Miller, that double pink that you see there on the far left. The Whirlinger Bride. That one, the flowers are kind of pendulous looking. The plant itself, not very weeping as the one on the far right, but still pretty. And then you have the Sweet Emily Kate. The flowers are as instead of being fully opened and very wide, or more like a vase, they open and they're still kind of closed a little bit. All right, hardiness zones for camellias. So we are right in the sweet spot. They go from 6 all the way through 10. Now, of course, different camellias are going to do better in different parts of their hardiness zone. So I'm always a fan of don't pick plants that are at the very top and the very bottom of their hardiness zone. You want that sweet spot in the middle. That's where they're best adapted to do well. So Camellia japonicas, they all go all the way up to zone 6, which that's going to be up into Illinois and Indiana, northern Missouri, and all the way down to zone 9, which is South Georgia and into the northern part of Florida. So that kind of puts us right here in the Atlanta metro area, kind of sweet spot. So that's why the Camellia sasanquas and japonicas do so well here. You can see with the Camellia sinensis, the tea plant, we're really up at the very far northern part of their hardiness zone. So again, that's one that if you really want to try and make your own tea, definitely go for it. You can always put it in a pot and wheel it in and out, or make sure that you're planting it in a microclimate because we are really kind of up in that very far northern part of its zone. And if we have a really harsh winter, we're kind of in a transition zone here. So if we have that harsh winter, you might lose it, or you're going to lose a good portion of it, and you'll have to do a lot of heavy pruning. The Camellia reticulata, again, You can try if it's in a microclimate in a protected area to grow that. We are up at the very tippy top of its hardiness zone, and same thing with oleifera. So you have to make sure that it's in a protected area or put it in a pot, just like I tell people to do with citrus. If you really want to grow that here in the Atlanta area, put it in a pot and move it. I know there are some hardy oranges, but they're not edible kind of oranges or citrus. So you're just better off putting it on casters and rolling it in and out if it's going to be really cold. That way, you can keep your plant. So pollinator value. So here's just a really quick chart of which ones are considered better and which ones don't have as much value. So the sasanquas have a pretty decent value for pollinators. I know I already mentioned you can overlap. Not every plant, not every cultivar within each group named variety is going to be a good pollinator plant. So do a little bit more research if you're interested in that. Choose single blooms if you can, or those semi doubles because it's easier for those insects to get in there. If you choose one of those real fancy anemones or peony type looking blooms, it's going to be really hard for them to get in there and get that pollen. So just choose the easy, simple ones. You can obviously have whatever you want there, but throw the bugs a bone. Throw them a bone and give them one nice single flower so they can get in there and feed. And they do have a decent nectar source for the bees and the butterflies and all of that stuff. They do rely on cross pollination, so just kind of keep that in the back of your head. Have a couple of them, or three or four if you can. All right, so common types of camellias. There are a lot more than what you see here. Remember, a lot of them are they're still over in the Far East. These are the ones that we'll see here in Georgia and the surrounding areas. And again, as I mentioned, the sasanquas, the japonicas, those are the most popular ones. Those are the ones that you will see most often in the stores available for purchase. You might see the sinensis, you might see the oleifera, but those are, again, further south. You'll see more of those in South Georgia and into Florida, North Florida, southern part of Alabama, and that if you see that. Reticulatas aren't as popular, but you may see some of those around also. So we'll talk a little bit about each. So japonicas, the most common and the hardiest camellias. And that, if you think about it and remember when I said that they tend to bloom in December through early spring. So that's when we have the hardest freezes. We might see snow. It's going to be the coldest. So these particular plants do very well. They tolerate that temperature. 50 degrees, we do get colder than that. They might bronze, their leaves bronze a little bit from that freeze damage, but they tolerate it fairly well. So again, just a dense upright shrub blooming late winter, early spring. These plants, all of them really kind of tend to prefer that partial to full shade. So if you have a spot that gets morning sun through, say, noon or 1 o'clock, something like that, and then it shifts to shade, that's perfect. It's going to get the sun that it needs without the harshness of the afternoon sun and the intensity. So if you have a place like that, it'll do wonderfully. If it's not getting as much sun, you're not going to have as many blooms. So maybe you can get, 2 or 3 hours of sun. You're not going to see as many blooms as this if you had it in there and it gets like 6 hours of morning sun. They're fairly slow growing, but eventually they will get up to 20 to 25 feet, depending on that upright growth. Again, there are some that have the different types, the wider growth. You just have to know what variety you're looking at. They are susceptible to something called sporting. So this is, and I've got an example here. So that means that some plants have an unstable genetic makeup. So they can have a mutation that causes them to have change in flowers, the color of the flowers. So for instance, you may have an old camellia that was planted, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, and it's been white all its life or red all its life. And then suddenly, for whatever reason, maybe I don't know, you had an introduction from of a virus from a bumblebee or something, suddenly one branch starts to produce flowers like this, white and red, variegated. And you may have, for the rest of its life, a mutation on that branch that produces variegated flowers. So, who knew, right? Camellias sasanquas. So, a little less hardy than the japonicas, but they tend to bloom in the late fall, early winter, so before the worst of the cold. They have usually smaller flowers, more simple petal structures. They're going to be your singular flowers. They all are going to tolerate more sun. So if you have an area that gets, maybe sun doesn't come around until 11 and hangs around until 3, these will probably be your best bet. But they still do prefer to have that morning sun. They just tolerate a little bit more. They're going to bloom anywhere from October to December. So this is Yuletide. And again, as I mentioned, we usually sell that one in our extension plant sales. So it's blooming in December. And some sasanquas, not all of them, some will have a fragrance that's going to help attract those pollinators. So, as I mentioned, the singular petal flowers are usually better and easier for the bugs to access that. And so, if they have a fragrance that goes along with it, that's going to attract more insects. So, it'll grow about 6 to 10 feet tall. And if you really want to get technical, the sasanquas are going to have fine hairs on their leaves. So if you walk up to one when it's not blooming and you look at it and you're like, oh, look at the hairs on there, it's a sasanqua. Reticulatus. So this is one that's tender and it's going to grow in South Georgia, preferably down into Florida. You might, and I say might be able to get it to grow in a microclimate in a very protected part of your yard. I always get people that say, I swear I have one growing in my yard. I don't believe them. And then they send me a picture, and lo and behold, it is. But it's usually like a brick house, like I said, that's a southern exposure that's surrounded by trees, and it is a true microclimate. Or they have it in a pot and they roll it in and out of their garage during the really cold periods. So in zones 9 and 10, if it's in the ground, it's going to form a tree and it can grow up to 35 feet tall, which is not usually what we expect to see. So this is one that you can prune into a really pretty tree that's going to bloom and you're like, oh, that's gorgeous. I don't live in Florida. I don't live in South Georgia, but I would like that. I think that would be really pretty. But here you can keep it in a container and, as I said, move it in and out when it's cold. It's going to bloom in the spring, and those flowers can be up to 10 inches across, which that's pretty big, right? Yeah, that's a really big flower. So the leaves also are not going to be as glossy as the Sasanqua leaves or the Japonica leaves. But hey, with a 10-inch blossom, who cares, right? So the other camellias of mention, you're going to have the chrysantha. That is the one that has yellow flowers. Everybody likes yellow, and again, this is one that's a little bit needs that microclimate. Then you have the oleifera and the sinensis. Those are your tea flowers, and they're very pretty in their own right. So if you're in South Georgia or Florida, maybe along the coast in South Carolina, down into Alabama and Mobile area, you can grow this. You could grow your own tea, make your own tea. So planting, we're going to kind of shift over into how do we take care of these things? How do we plant them? What kind of diseases? That kind of stuff. So locating a shady area, like I mentioned, morning sun, if you can do it, preferably no afternoon sun. You really want to do it just like you do with any other tree or shrub, plant it in the fall. When the temperatures start dropping in the air, evaporation rates go down, but the soil temperatures are still nice. As long as you're watering, that's perfect for root development. So if you can plant them in the fall, that's the best time to do it. So you also want to make sure that they have a decent organic content in that soil. So if you're putting them in heavy clay, you might need to really dig a bigger area around where you're going to put that plant and really do just a tiny little bit of amendment. You don't need to do a ton. In fact, the science doesn't recommend heavily changing the soil constitution. But if you're putting something that's in a 1 gallon pot, If you can move that hole out and do 3 or 4 times the size of that hole, maybe mix a third organic matter in if it's very heavy clay, that's not going to change things too much, but it will make your plant happier. Don't plant them near a sidewalk or anything like any type of concrete, your driveway or whatever. That concrete can actually leach and it can cause the pH of the soil to go up. Also, don't plant it right next to a foundation if you have a poured foundation or the brick. Don't put it immediately adjacent. Now, I know I keep talking about microclimates and all of that. You never really want to plant anything too close to a foundation. If you can do 10 feet away or 12 feet away, that's usually fine. And that helps protect it still, and that will eliminate any of the leaching of the concrete, which can change the pH to something they don't like. So work some peat moss in there into that top area, maybe a little cow manure, that'll make it happy. And then soak it for a bit and then go ahead and plant. Oh, and the soil test. Get a soil test. I'll talk about that in a bit. So planting, again, minimum 1.5 times deeper and 2 times wider, you're going to loosen that soil. You don't want to plant that root ball below that point. You just want to loosen that soil up because you want those roots to be able to grow down into something that's not hard pan. So if you want to be even nicer to it, loosen that soil up even further, but still make sure you plant it no deeper than where it appears in the pot. You want to leave a small kind of mounded area in the center, and that's going to prevent the settling because as it settles a little bit, you don't want it to dip further because if it ends up too deep, then it's going to hold a lot of water and you might end up with root rot. Backfill some of that soil and firm it up as you go, and then put a little bit of a berm around it, and that's going to hold water there. And then if you need to, sprinkle a little of that cottonseed meal. And that goes for if you're going to plant in a pot too. I've mentioned several of these, especially the tea plants. You can put them in a pot and then wheel them in and out as needed, and you can make your own tea. Watering. So just like anything else, you really want to make sure that you're wet down to, 14 to 18 inches deep, especially when you're trying to establish these plants. I mean, we have fairly dry falls, so it's kind of important that we are watering pretty regularly. Get a drip hose, turn it on, make sure that you're measuring, get that tuna can out there, figure out how long you have to leave it on in order to get that. That's the best thing you can do. Very easy. And you don't have to really worry about that evaporation rate. It's lower in the fall. You can put some mulch down over the top of your drip hose, makes it easy peasy to get water to it. And if you can, add a little extra when it's flowering. You don't want your flowers to fall off prematurely. Okay, mulching. So you want to add 2 to 4 layers of wood chips or some type of pine straw or some other kind of mulch. Don't do the mulch for volcano. I didn't put that on here. Sometimes I'll put the little volcano for the mulch volcano, but don't do that. It's not going to be good. Just like any other plant or tree that you do that with, it can start growing new roots into that mulch, and that's not good. We don't want to do that. Adventitious roots is what they're called. We don't want that. So just put your 2 to 4 inches of wood chips or pine straw or something over that. That helps the evaporation rate, keep it down, and keeps that water in the soil. It's going to help insulate the root system from cold, from hot, and I really think you should mulch everything if you can, because that also breaks down into organic matter, which is just going to help the plant and add that back to the soil. So, mulch once or twice a year. It really depends on what kind of materials you're using. If you've got pine bark, that takes longer to break down. So you probably only really need to do that once every year, once every other year. Pine straw, I'd say a couple times a year if you can, or just when it starts to break down. And make sure that you practice good garden hygiene. If they drop branches or leaves, get those out of there, replace it because those disease-causing agents, like for T-scale and fungal diseases, they can live in all of those dead leaves that they drop. As I mentioned, they're evergreen, but they still do drop leaves. So it's just not all at once. So just make sure you get all of that out of there, bag it up and get it gone. Don't put it in your compost pile. Basics on fertilizers. This is, again, most people are going to know this, but fertilizer numbers, like what you see there on that all-purpose fertilizer, the 12, 12, 12, or whatever numbers, that's going to be the first number is nitrogen. And if you don't have enough nitrogen, you're going to have a yellowish color. We'll talk about a little bit about that. But you'll have a yellowish color to your new growth, the new green growth that's coming up. It'll be kind of spindly and sad looking, and it'll be kind of a yellowish, light green color. And that means you don't have enough nitrogen in the soil. So that's one thing that it will put in there. Two, the second number, that's going to be phosphorus. That helps with that energy transfer. In a vegetable, that's going to provide for the fruit, like tomatoes that you're going to pick. But here, that's going to be part of the energy transfer system that makes it possible for it to flower. And then third number, that's going to be potassium. And if you don't have the potassium, that's going to slow the growth down and you won't see near as many flowers or seeds on your plant. So it's always important that you have a good balanced fertilizer. You also need to make sure, if you can, to have a complete fertilizer. That's going to be one that's going to include all the micronutrients. Plants need 13 to 16 different elements. And most people, if you've got them in a pot, they burn through those, whatever happened to be in that potting soil pretty quick. So you need to add back through fertilizer. A lot of people want to use organics. That is fine. These days, manufacturers are wise to people not wanting to source all sorts of different products to make up all of those different elements. So what they do is they put them all in one bag and then they sell it to you that way. So with organics, you're going usually for compounds. So it's going to be like fish meal or cottonseed meal or borax or something like that. And you're sourcing all of the compounds that are in there, the chemical compounds. And then those eventually will break down into the usable elements that the plant can use. I'm more a fan of organics for food producing plants, less worried about it for ornamental type plants, but everybody chooses their own. I think it all benefits plants the same if it's an inorganic source or an organic source. A lot of the reasons why we kind of moved away from the inorganic sources is for essentially out west where you have very limited water sources. A lot of times water is pumped up from really big deep depths and you have salts. You can have salt problems. So you get crusts on the soil from using that water over and over again. Here we don't have that problem. We have a lot of rain. We have anywhere from 52 inches up to 60 some odd inches, it seems like. And a lot of times we have gully washers. We just had one at my house, and I think I got an inch in like, I don't know, 30 minutes. So generally it's not a problem. But if that's what you would like to do, make sure that you're sourcing a good quality fertilizer that has those micronutrients, or you're sourcing those separately, like you see here in this little bottle, and you're giving them what they need in the smaller amounts, which you don't have to give the micronutrients as often. All right. So to find the pounds of each nutrient, and there are calculators online, so don't stress if you don't know how to do this. That basically gives you the pounds that are available in whatever bag you're looking at versus dry weight. So you can use a 12-4-8 fertilizer to encourage growth in new young camellias because you've got that higher 12 for the nitrogen, and then a 4-8-8 to encourage them to flower. You don't need something that's like 23-42-86. You don't need that. That's hard to come by. Your plants aren't going to use it, and it's going to end up down in your storm soon. Part of my advanced training had to do with that. I'm trying to tell people only fertilize what you need. More is not better. And so if you see those high numbers and you think, oh, that's fantastic, I'm going to buy that bag and my plants are going to look good. Well, your plants aren't going to use all that. It's just going to wash away. So just be judicious about what you put down on your plants. Only put what your plants can use. So caring for them, use a slow release fertilizer. They don't need a lot, so if you can get a time release, that's perfect. And you want to kind of fertilize them half strength after they've really kind of bloomed, but before the next bloom cycle. So that will help keep the plant healthy so that when you are ready to have those blooms, the plant's going to be at peak capacity and able to produce a good crop of blooms for you. Um, a lot of times, and I tell this to folks, don't prune right before a cold spell and don't fertilize right in the fall because you're going to fertilize them. They're going to grow a lot. That's tender foliage. It's not hardened off yet. And if we get an early cold snap, you're going to lose all that new growth. So fight yourself to do any fall fertilization. Try to set a reminder to do it in the summertime, not in the fall in October. And you can use stuff like Milorganite, cow manure, fish emulsion, that kind of stuff in the spring to give it kind of a boost moving forward, or just buy one of those organic all-inclusives. Pruning, remove dead, weak branches. This kind of goes par for course on any type of woody plant or tree. You can do some renewal pruning. So if it's gotten really big and unwieldy and you're like, I got to knock this thing down, I can't see out my bay window anymore, go ahead and do that pruning, reshape it if you need to. Try to do it over a multi-year process, though, to kind of bring it back into the shape that it needs to be at. You're going to cut just above where a leaf is, where it's the branch kind of branches off at the node, like you see there, and do it right after it's done blooming. So that means early spring. Okay. You don't want to really do it while in that February-ish time when it might freeze, but you're after the worst of the cold when you're moving into that early spring, March, April, that's a perfect time to do it. Don't use a hedge trimmer, use your pruning shears. And if you want bigger blooms and healthier blooms, you can pluck those off if you want to do that. Similar to what you would do with a fruit tree to have bigger, healthier fruits, you can do the same for your blooms. Propagating, same way you would do it with a hydrangea or anything else. You can take some cuttings like you see here, use a little rooting compound, put it in a pot and with moist soil and put a baggie on it and put it in indirect light. That's going to act like a little mini greenhouse and hopefully you will have some rootings. You can also do air layering. This works really well with hydrangeas also. So you can buy these really neat little rooting balls. They're cheap. You can get them on Amazon, order them online, whichever. And you basically can put some sphagnum moss in there, nice moist, wet sphagnum moss, and put your kind of scrub the side of the branch a little bit and to kind of rough it up. Put that sphagnum moss around there and then just clip that on there. It's got a nice clear side so you can see the roots grow. When you've seen that those roots have grown in and around in that plastic ball, you just snip it below, you pop it off, and you put it in a pot. Rough up the roots a little bit. Boom, you got a new plant. If you don't want to pay for those super cheap little plastic balls, you can just do it the old-fashioned way. Rough up the area, get that sphagnum moss, and then you can take some aluminum foil, put some plastic wrap around it, and some aluminum foil like you see there. Works just as good. You can do some grafting. So you're gonna, cut down there, cut the branch off, take some tips, rough those up, and put them into the notches, and then you can use some type of floral tape or something to kind of wrap that. They will all grow together. And seeds, although that's a very long-term project, and you might end up with a genetic mix if you've got multiple different cultivars growing on your property. But hey, sometimes it's fun to see what you might end up with, right? So some of the problems you might have. So you might have petal blight. That's a fungal disease. So you start seeing these brown spots on the flowers, and it's not like I mentioned, those flowers will last days. So if you start seeing these brown spots and they fall off pretty quick, then you probably have this fungal disease. So it's going to affect the petals. It doesn't really affect anything else. And it's windblown spores, so you can't do much about that. Usually, cool fall weather by a wet, warmer weather kind of pattern, which is plentiful here in Georgia, let's be honest. And it can be up in it can stay in the soil for up to 5 years. I always laugh at the 5 years because they say that for pretty much every fungal disease. And as far as I know, spores can suddenly come to life after hundreds of years. So try to practice that good garden hygiene as best as you can and get that stuff out if you notice that a plant has a problem. And then use some mulch to put down on the soil to cover that area so there's no splashback. And then fungicide, if you know that your plant had it last year, you may want to go ahead and spray this year to kind of prevent that. Dieback, um, this is a common here in hot and humid climates, less severe in japonicas than others, which, those do fairly well. And also, you don't usually have warm periods during that time of the year. Again, that's the later winter one. They enter the plant through wounds and leaf scars or that kind of stuff, and it can cause what you see here. So the leaves will kind of drain of their color, and then they start turning brown, and the new growth kind of curls back, and it just looks really sad. And then you have a dead branch on your plant. So remove it all, just kind of prune it, making sure that you're disinfecting in between each cut. Don't apply nitrogen because that's just going to encourage growth, and you need to kind of get it under control before you do anything more. T-scale, nasty little bugs. So here you see a blow up of one. Kind of looks like a churro, doesn't it? Didn't think about that earlier. I haven't had dinner yet. So you'll see in the spring and summer, you'll get these new hatched crawlers. Those are the most mobile stage, and they're going to move about on those new leaves. They're looking for the real sensitive new growth because they're going to suck the juices out of there. So what you'll notice is you're going to have these really stippled appearances on the leaves, these little chlorotic spots, because they're sucking all of that stuff off. The males are going to have that white kind of cottony look to it. You just want to go squish them. And to control that, it's better to control it in the younger stage, as it is with most pest species, but horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, neem oil, that kind of thing. And then you might have to, if you have a really heavy infestation on several branches, just go ahead and prune it out to just remove the source and get it off site, bag it up and get it off site. Aphids, um, called plant lice. You can try insecticidal soap, neem oil, or just a jet of water. You can also, if you need to, try to spray them off, or do some pruning if you've got a really heavy infestation, maybe on the tips. Those aphids, ants can farm them. They'll move them to the softer, newer growth because they want them to suck that up and then exude that honeydew, and then that black mold will grow there. So you may need to do a little bit of pruning or wiping down if you really need to do that. Sometimes people don't even worry about it. It generally doesn't really hurt the plant too much. Spider mites, again, you'll get that bronzing or kind of that stippling. You usually don't see them, but that's what they look like. They look like a mite that's kind of like a spider. And a lot of times they'll be under the leaves. You won't really see them, but they are have those piercing, sucking mouth parts. They'll suck the juice out of there too. So if you have a really severe infestation, your leaves cannot look green anymore, and they look that browny, nasty color. So you can either use a strong jet of water, or again, you can use neem oil. That's a good one. Or you can spray with a miticide or an ascaricide in the spring a couple times over that 7-day interval when they are most active. And that can a lot of times help get rid of them. Leaf and bud gall. This is one that pops up every so often. We'll get calls about these weird looking leaves that are on my camellia. What are they? So it's a fungal disease, and it causes the thickening, distorting leaves, and you usually see them in the cool summer months like February to April. You can just pluck them off. Preferably get them before all of those layers start to peel, because it's a fungal disease. It's going to release those spores. You want to get rid of it because you don't want it to reinfect. So if the conditions come around again, you don't want it to be there. So go ahead and pluck them off the minute you see them and get rid of them. Get them off of your property. You're most likely going to see them in the sasanquas. Chlorotic leaves, I mentioned that. Lots of different symptoms, but it's a nutrient deficiency. Usually that means that your nitrogen levels are low. It can also mean iron deficiency, but generally speaking, because iron is a micronutrient, your nitrogen, which is a macronutrient, your plant needs more of that, is that's the reasoning behind it. But if it's in a pot, it's probably a lack of both. So make sure that you have a complete fertilizer. And if it's been 2 years since you've done anything to your poor plant in that pot, give it a boost. It really needs it. Different conditions. So again, some issues that you might see. Buds are not setting. That could mean too little sun. You could see, you know, bud drop. That means that you're not watering enough, and that can happen like blueberries or anything else. If you don't have enough water, that plant is going to try to protect itself, which meaning it's going to drop those buds. So make sure you're constantly watering. And if you don't have that plant in an area where you're not getting enough sun, consider moving it if it's not too big. Balling, that is when the bud doesn't fully develop. So the petals start to brown around the outside, like you see here. And that's going to be in like really cool, wet conditions. So if you have a really cool, wet fall and winter, that's when you probably are going to see it. And it's usually stress induced. So not by bugs, not by fungi. Um, a lot of times it's when plants are establishing. So they're trying really hard to grow that root system. Maybe you have to the plant in too much sun, it's in full sun and it doesn't want to. Maybe it's drought induced, you haven't been watering it, you're trying to get it established, or very warm fall temperatures. There have been falls where it's been 90 degrees into mid-October. So that happens. Don't panic. It's just a temporary thing. Root rot, this is when you love them too much, or you have them planted in a low spot and you don't have really good drainage. Or, like I said, you have them in a pot, you water them too much. So, if you can stop watering them, you might need to assess if the roots are okay. If they're not, then you might need to cut some things off and try to salvage the plant. And if the plant's too far gone, if it looks like what you see below, you might need to get a different plant. Gibbing. So this is something you can do if you are into plant shows or you want super big and beautiful flowers. And so this is where you enhance your flowers. So you can remove competing buds and then you get the gibberellic acid, which you can buy it. I think I saw it at Do My Own. You can probably get it on Amazon. It's a plant hormone. So you pluck off that little bud, and then in the open wound for where that bud was, you can use a syringe or an eyedropper or whatever, and you apply a drop there. The plant will absorb that, and that bloom will suddenly get bigger. All right? Here's your secret. So I'm right on time. It's 7 o'clock. Amazing. And this was a new one too. So I'm going to see if there are any good questions here. Thank you for 2 back-to-back presentations. Yes, I worked on this one all day. I'm calling this one Hell Week. It's been a really hard and long week. I am glad tomorrow's Friday. The North Georgia Camellia Show is every February at the Atlanta Botanical Garden Day Hall. Yes, a juried show and exhibitors from all over the Southeast, and it's free. So this would be a great place and time to go see a good selection of really beautiful camellias, some of the best. So yeah, that's awesome. So thank you for that information. Would cuttings off a branch that is sporting have a new variegated color? So keep in mind that the way that you propagate these, you can do that with the either roughing it up and adding the saran wrap, the peat moss and saran wrap, and then the aluminum foil, or getting one of those plastic balls. And so anything you grow off that branch is going to be a new plant. It's going to replicate and be exactly like the parent plant. It's a clone. So yes, if you cut that branch off and you root it, that will be an entirely new plant that will have that genetic makeup of what it is. And that is how a lot of stuff happens in the nursery industry. You're very astute. So that's how we get a lot of those mutations, and people like those mutations. And so the nursery industry runs with it, and boom, that's how you get that new variegated or really pretty color, whatever. side double flower instead of a single flower. Learning so much. I have Jujaponicas. Thank you. Yes, that's great. I love it when people learn stuff. That's awesome. I learn a lot as I go through and write these also. Massey Lane Garden in Fort Valley, Georgia, home to our beloved Queen of the Winter Garden and American Camellia Society. Yes, go visit. Go visit, definitely. Thank you for sharing. Um, I haven't been, but I will put that on my calendar to go. You are welcome. Okay, good. Yes. So if you want a copy of the slide deck, I'm gonna put that to everyone here. If you want a copy of the slide deck, email me, please. At, at my email there. And I am perfectly happy to share my slide deck with you, which will have all of the good information in there. And you can use that for however you would like. This will probably show up on the Metro Master Gardener channel. I'm going to say next week. I have a couple. I had a long vacation road trip that I didn't get the stuff up. I ran out of time. So I have a couple that need to go up there. This one needs to go up there. I got to do a lot of housekeeping stuff, getting things sent off and getting people slide decks from the last one. So that'll probably happen next week. All right. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that. Yes, big house needs trimming. Um, yeah, after it blooms. So you can actually, we're kind of running out of, we're running into late summer. So now you still can prune if you want to, although granted, it's pretty hot and humid right now. So we have a lot of um, fungal issues while we have really high humidity. So probably best maybe if you don't need to prune it right now, just wait until next spring after that and then prune. But it's not the end of the world if you do it. They're pretty hardy plants, especially if it's gotten really too big for where it is. We're always a fan of if you've got crossing or rubbing branches, or if it's crawling up into your gutter system and you need to do some maintenance on it, definitely do that. Don't hold back from worrying about what's going to happen with the plant. Trim it back if you need to. Household maintenance is far better and more important than anything else. Okay, are there any other questions? If anybody has any questions, drop them in the chat box. If not, grab my email address there and shoot me an email if you want the slide deck, and I'll be happy to share that with you. And I encourage everyone to go check out the YouTube channel. There's a lot of stuff archived there. Uh, I've been kind of doing these webinars now for, I don't know, probably about 3 years. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. Sometimes I repeat, but I do a lot of new stuff. If you have questions, if you have suggestions for a presentation you would like to see, you want somebody to go a little more in depth for you and put it all together in a neat little package, send me an email and I'll take a look at it and maybe put it on the list for something to do in the future. But if that's basically it, then I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation. But thank you all so much for attending. I really appreciate it. Have a good evening.